All right, so I'm going to be talking about a response to this video made by Garbaj. He's a really good game developer. He makes a lot of cool things in Unity, and he talks about a lot of cool game design choices that a lot of developers make. But they're very technical oriented, and I really like that. He made a video where he doesn't know what's going on here about FPS scopes. So he's talking about the perspective of scopes used in FPS games. And he demonstrates that in his demo, the scope is kind of like a tube, right? But with the perspective, there's so much space being occluded by the scope. And his solution, the solution, or one of the solutions is yeah. So here you can see that there's a render texture on the scope, and everything else around it is not affected by the scope. And you can kind of see here on the scope, it's just a texture. It's just a texture from the camera that's coming out of the scope here, projected directly onto this surface. So that's one way to do it. The main thing I'm going to talk about here is when he talks about Apex. Here, let me go ahead and just play it.
But this is where it gets a little weird. Take Apex Legends for example. This game, like many others, does not use picture-in-picture in its sights and instead just zooms in the entire screen. However, when you do aim down the sight, you don't see the inner walls of the scope. The opening on the far side appears just as wide as the near side, which is not how perspective works. The far side should always appear smaller no matter what. My first guess was that when aiming, the game stops rendering everything except for the back face of the scope, so that there wouldn't be anything there to block your view. But I don't know if that's right, because you can actually see the front of the scope moving around slightly when you rotate your camera. Then I thought maybe there was some weird forced perspective thing going on, maybe deforming the mesh in some way to shorten the distance between the two ends of the scope. But not to toot my own horn or anything, but I feel like I would have noticed this if it were the case, but I haven't seen anything. Regardless,
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and explain this really quick, because this is actually a very common thing that FPS games do. The player model and the hand, they're actually rendered separately. So I don't know if you've ever like gone up to a wall or anything in an FPS game and seen if the gun goes through the wall. If you play any like indie games or prototypes of FPS games where they're not very polished yet, most of the time that's what happens. You'll go up to a wall and the gun will go through the wall, which isn't normal. Every FPS game you've played will have if you go up to the wall, it does not go through it. It doesn't clip at all. In fact, I don't think I've ever played a game where the gun or the player hand clips into anything. And the reason is because this is actually rendered using a different camera, right? So they rendered just the gun and the player hand in the environment, so it has lighting as well, so it fits in with the scene. And then they overlay that on top of a render of the entire scene. So I'm going to go ahead and demonstrate that here in Unity. Here I took the base first-person template for Unity, and I kind of modified it a little. So here's the player capsule. I went into here and I added a bit of code. Up here at the top, I added a public animator called anim. Now I do have a parameter called aiming, and it's a Boolean. And when this is true, the aiming is equal to true. It'll go from the unaim animation to the gun aim animation, and I'll show you what those look like. It's just two keyframes, or not two keyframes. It's all these keyframes for the different things that are different when you're aiming. So the field of view on the main camera, the field of view on the gun camera, and the position of the rifle. These are all set right here. You can see it in the bottom right. Oh, there we go. So you can see here in the bottom right corner that is our animation, and it's not animated at all. It's just one single keyframe for all of these properties. If I press play, nothing's going to happen because it doesn't actually go to another keyframe. It's just this keyframe, and it just stays on that. our unaim animation is the same exact keyframes and properties, but they're set to the default values. So this is, you can see it down here that the rifle is back at its normal position, the field of view is normal, and all of that. In the script is we have that animator set as a variable here. If right click is held down, which is called fire 2 in the input manager, then we're going to get that animator and we're going to set a boolean. The boolean we're going to set is called aiming, right? The one that I set before. And we're just going to set that to true. Else, if we're not holding right click, we're just going to set aiming to false. Same exact thing, we're just doing false instead. So if we go back to Unity here, you can see here in the animator, if I press play, if I right click, you can see that aiming is set to true every time right click is held down. So that's it. But what these properties are is what actually makes the effect work. So what we have here is a main camera, and that's the main one that we're set through. Under here I have this one called gun cam, and what I did is I changed the render type to overlay here. And what that does is it allows you to use it in a stack. It has all the same properties as the main camera. And then in our main camera, I added it to the stack here. Everything is pretty much the same. But if I go here to the gun cam, you can see it's just rendering the gun itself. If we go to the main cam, you can see that it's not rendering the gun. But in our game view, you can see it has the main camera and the gun overlaid on top of it. So what I did here on the unaim animation, you can see both cameras are set to 60 for the field of view. When I go to the aim animation, the main camera gets set to 32, so it's zoomed in just a little bit. But the gun camera is set very tight, and that's so we can have that zoomed in look right here. That's basically how Apex does it, or really any FPS game. The main reason why this is done is because you don't want your gun clipping into the walls. See here, if I were to, let's say, let's disable this one, or let's put this under the main camera. Let's disable this camera, and here we're going to enable the player model, which is our gun. So let's go here. Let's just move that over a little. Okay. So this is, sorry about the positioning of the gun, but this is what you might normally see in like a prototype or something, where the gun is just attached to the camera and the camera renders everything all at once. But if I go up to this wall, you can see that the gun clips into the wall. No AAA game or really any polished game has this issue because almost all games with like on-screen weaponry or on-screen tools, anything like that, is going to have this setup right here where it's rendered separately. So if I walk into this, you're not going to see the gun go into the wall, even though technically at this position it would. Like if I go here, right? Sorry. Go there. And I look here, you can see that the gun it's fully in the wall. It's 100% inside the wall. But the gun camera is only rendering the gun. It doesn't render the wall. And since that's an overlay, that puts the gun on top of our main camera, which is rendering the wall. So that's why you don't get that issue here. And that's also how they're able to change the field of view on just the gun. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of outline how that's done, and if it helps anybody out, especially Garbage, I just wanted to answer how that happens in Apex. Yeah, that's basically it. Different camera rendering a different field of view for the gun. That's it.